Welcome to Baha'i Books and Authors, a podcast which introduces to you writers and the works they've penned related to the Baha'i Faith. We'll explore the inspiration, the process, and the stories behind their work. I'm your host, Jan Grammer. This podcast is produced by World Unity Media, which also produces Baha'i audiobooks. Imagine laws that don't just tell you what to do or what not to do, but open a life-changing vision of possibility. Laws not as mere rules and regulations, but as a framework for transforming your own life and the society around you. Baha'u'lláh calls his laws choice wine, which he has unsealed. And he says, by their aid, the standards of victory will be planted upon the highest peaks, and the precepts constitute the highest means for the maintenance of order in the world and the security of its peoples. How can we more fully understand the choice wine? What might be the highest peaks upon which the standards of victory will be planted? Dimensions of Bahá'í Law is a collection of essays on this fascinating topic, delving into aspects of Baha'u'llah's laws, exhortations, and precepts, illuminating how they nurture inner spiritual growth, while also bringing about meaningful social change for the maintenance of order in the world. Author Dr. Roshan Danesh is an accomplished educator, lawyer, and conflict resolution expert. He'll help us explore how Baha'i law inspires a deeper understanding of justice, unity, and transformation. Welcome, Roshan.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
What inspired you to compile Dimensions of Bahá'í Law?
The book is a compilation of a set of articles that I wrote over a span of 20 years or so. But my initial interest in Baha'i law, I was an undergrad student in Montreal in 1992, which is when the English translation of the Kitab-i-Aqdas was made widely available for the first time. At that time, there was a lot of excitement and study in the Baha'i community about it and a lot of talk about it. And I got interested in it, and it started me on a path of going to law school and then graduate studies in law. And all along that legal journey, while I've done other things, exploring Baha'i law and how we think about it was one aspect of my studies over those years.
How would you describe the Kitab-i-Aqdas, the book of Baha'u'llah's laws?
On the one hand, that's a little presumptuous to describe it because it has so many descriptions and titles and way it's described in the Baha'i writings, from the mother book, the book of laws, as the charter. There's dozens, if not more, names and titles to the book. But I think part of your question, and this goes also to the question of what inspired me to compile the book, is really to question, challenge, encourage people to reflect on their own assumptions about law and about Baha'i law that they carry with them when they start thinking about the book. That we all live and come from different legal cultures and legal imaginations, and some of those ways of thinking about law are not necessarily aligned or in consort with how Baha'u'lláh encourage us to think about law. So in that respect, when we talk about how we describe the Kitab-i-Aqdas, it's a book, given its extremely condensed expression of very complicated ideas, that we almost have to approach the ways that we would approach any great writing, literature or otherwise, where every time we visit it, we're finding new meanings, new associations, new personal insights into it. And that's a very different way of reading something than when we pick up some boring book of statutes and start leafing through them.
It certainly isn't a list of do's and don'ts. There's much written in it which uplifts and seeks to transform. Can you give us an example?
Just with your question and the way of framing of do's and don'ts, it's important to remember that Baha'u'lláh came from a legal culture of do's and don'ts. Even more of a sense of do's and don'ts and an emphasis on rigidity of do's and don'ts than people from many other parts of the world may imagine. And this is, of course, the Islamic legal culture that he came out of. While there's many different Islamic legal traditions, at the time and in the context Baha'u'lláh was in, it was a very legally oriented way of viewing the world. Individuals would be encouraged to, in many ways, blindly obey rules. And that this was key to salvation. This was key to ordering one's life in the right way. So you can imagine these early followers of Baha'u'lláh asking, where are the do's and don'ts? What do we do? What do we don't do? There's a lesson in the history of the response to those because he resisted answering those. He didn't give them the new list of do's and don'ts. At one time, he revealed some do's and don'ts, but then didn't release it to the community or distribute it. Then when he revealed the Kitab-i-Aqdas in 1873, he held it back for a period of time. There's all this pattern of delay in the application, in the relationship to Baha'i law that is a complete break from that do's and don'ts culture that Baha'u'lláh came from, that the Baha'i faith has its cultural orientation out of. That history, that pattern, that shift, that break is really important for us to reflect upon and carry around when we think about Baha'i law and what it is. There's things you'll read in the book that sound like do's and don'ts, but on the one hand, many of those we're told don't apply or they're matters of individual conscience. They're things you search out and understand for yourself and apply to yourself. And on the other hand, you'll see laws to do with appearance or cleanliness or things along these lines where if you just do a little exploration of explanations of them from the Universal House of Justice or others, or around them and how we're about to apply them, you see that they're actually applications of a spiritual principle, such as refinement and all of the characteristics of physical and spiritual refinement. So rather than focusing on the letter of the law, these aren't my words, this is the House of Justice, we should focus on the informing spirit of the laws and understand it and obey it from that perspective.
You mentioned how Baha'u'llah's laws differ from those of the traditional Islamic laws. What about the conventional Western laws?
There's many traditions of Western law, and they share certain attributes. And of course, Western law has evolved over time from early roots in a religious legal system and heavily influenced by the evolution of law in Christianity and so forth to more of a social focus on ordering society and how society functions. The Western legal traditions, we carry around with us a sort of set of assumptions that is also around do's or don'ts. It's just those do's and don'ts tend to focus more not on personal, individual, spiritual development and aspects of dimensions of one's life. Those are kind of seen as a realm completely outside of the law. And the focus is more on social relations, social order, maintaining the well-being of society as a whole, safety, protection, those sorts of issues. And the focus then becomes on the state passing laws to order society in a certain way. While in the Baha'i conception of law, the focus is much more on that inner dimension, that inner relationship with law. Baha'u'lláh, of course, speaks of law as something that we should follow because we know it and we do it out of love. So law has a specific inner purpose to it. Our relationship with law is to help us cultivate certain spiritual patterns in our life and to express those in our relationships and our daily actions. The other major shift from Western conventional laws is that the laws of Baha'u'lláh, when we do talk about the social dimension of them, have a specific purpose, which is to reinforce, cultivate unity between peoples. That is the fundamental purpose of law, just as it is in many things in the Baha'i Faith, is to help humanity express its fundamental interconnection, to learn how to live in a way that recognizes the distinctiveness and diversity of peoples, but also helps them interact in a way that helps the common good, helps individuals flourish, helps the collective flourish, and so on. So his social laws have a very specific focus and purpose to them as well.
Are there examples where Baha'i law has influenced communities or social development in ways that could be measured?
I could answer that question in two ways. And one is, as I described, a bit of Baha'u'llah's attitude towards his own laws, saying, wait, take your time. When the Kitab-i-Aqdas does get disseminated to the Baha'i community in the late 1800s, early 1900s, he says, don't follow them. You can imagine these early believers, like, what's going on here, right? Like, it's like a total, especially from the Muslim background, it's like a total shift from salvation means doing yes or no's. And all of a sudden we're in this, I got to figure it out for myself. I have these laws. Then, of course, some of them apply to Persian believers differently than believers from other part of the world. So it's like all of this delay and shift. So that is all a pattern of law being backgrounded. Even though the Kitab-i Aqdas, which is a book of laws, amongst other things, has this preeminent place in Baha'u'llah's writings, the actual interaction with, operation with, law in action is backgrounded in the history of the Baha'i community. Now, it builds over time, but we're not going around identifying and shaping our community as a legally bound community following a certain set of rules in some very rigid or particular way. But on the other hand, there are examples where you'll see certain of those underlying principles that inform many of the laws causing a shift in social behaviors, community functioning, community organization. So many of the examples that people would give about this, of course, are around, for example, gender equality, where in societies, Iran, for example, where gender equality was a very faint and remote aspiration and expression in society, you had, because of this principle of in the Baha'i faith that animates itself in having to have conditions in equality in our legal expressions and realities, you see the community turn its mind to focusing on the education of girls over boys, or integrating community meetings or institutions like assemblies and having men and women work on them together. These are reflecting aspects of Baha'i law. So there's very tangible examples where the teachings of the faith and the laws of the faith begin to animate themselves. And there's other examples very similar to that in the United States, where Abdu'l-Baha, for example, says, no, these communities need to be integrated across racial lines or across gender lines. And these assemblies need to be integrated along racial lines, along gender lines. All of this is starting to put that forward into action.
It's interesting that you note the early believers, some of them petitioned Baha'u'lláh. Give us the laws. Tell us what we're supposed to do. Tell us what we're not supposed to do. And there are many personal laws that we're to obey, we're to bring our lives more in line with nobody looking over our shoulders, whether that be prayer, whether that be fasting. Do you find in any societies that you're aware of a difficulty with people not having someone standing over them to enforce a law?
I think it's very challenging for people. I often, when I've spoken about Baha'i law over the years, and I kind of pose rhetorically, who's the central legal actor in the Baha'i legal order at the moment? And I think most people talk about Baha'u'lláh, of course, or most likely they'll talk about the Universal House of Justice because of their legislative function. But I think the reality is the central legal actor, it's the individual. There's some small areas where an assembly may play a role. The Universal House of Justice has a legislative function, but they really have not legislated. There is not a body of legislation. They did not get elected and then in the last 50 years, 60 years, pass all sorts of sets of laws. They've actually done very little of that. No, it's the individual. It goes to Baha'u'llah's words about obey my commandments for the love of my beauty, and his exhortations to apprehend the laws, to follow them out of knowledge, to form that personal relationship with the laws and one's own conscience for how one's going to follow them, because that then is galvanizing and drawing on the spiritual capacities of the individual to begin to manifest those in their own lives and their relationships in society as a whole. It's a evolutionary long-term process for individuals and then communities to begin to reorient their choices, their actions, their behaviors in a conscious, mindful way to creating unity with each other, to creating greater patterns of justice with one another. And most importantly, and this connects to one of the reasons for this, is the centrality again of unity in how this is to unfold. Because Baha'u'llah's laws, when they're to be broader applied, need a context of broader social unity and cohesion. They're not to be a source of dissension and conflict in their emanation and expression in society. Everything in the faith, our means and ends, have to be united in how we approach change in society, changing legal orders, and so forth and so on.
Baha'u'lláh says that his laws are the choice wine. What does that mean to you?
paragraph 5 of the Kitab-i-Aqdas has been talked about and I think written about a fair bit. So it's often discussed as how following the laws can free us from limitations and inhibitions. Following the laws is one of those cardinal things that can help us fully reveal and live up to our purpose. Because following the laws is a way to spiritually transform and uplift ourselves. We have to remember we're in this odd reality of being spiritual beings in physical form, and it's forever discordant and dissociative. And our whole purpose in life is to increasingly place a focus and an awareness and an understanding and emanate and manifest our spiritual attributes, love, justice, trustworthy, you go down the list in our daily lives. And so following the laws knowingly out of love is one of the ways of cultivating the ability to do that more and more. So in that way, it frees us, it uninhibits us, it helps us meet our purpose.
To live more as the spiritual being, not the material, physical being. Thank you. What are your thoughts about laws as the highest peaks upon which the standards of victory will be planted?
The highest peaks of our being, the highest expressions of our reality, the highest spiritual refinement and characteristics we can emanate and manifest will be reflected and our purpose shown most, our flourishing, our potential most fully met when we are following the laws or engaging with the laws in that way, according to their informing spirit, right? Not the letter of the law. Blind obedience, if we read the book and just blindly say, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, we will not be doing that. We have to follow them, understand its intent, understand its purpose, and do it out of our choice and will and love. Then we will reach the highest peaks.
Would you explain the difference between a precept, an exhortation, and a law?
Very functionally, a law would be more a statement of something to be obeyed. An exhortation would be more of a strong encouragement to do something. And a precept would be something, I think, when we're talking about it in the Bahá'í conception, that would speak more to a spiritual principle that we should be striving to uphold and live up to in all aspects of our lives. And some respects would underline some of the other categories, would be underneath them and animate the laws and the exhortations. In some instances, you have the same terms in Arabic being used, but then translated as precept or law.
What is a key understanding or an insight that you would like the readers of your book to take away?
I think a key takeaway is the encouragement to critically self-reflect on one's own assumptions about law when one is trying to understand Bahá'í Law and understand the Kitab-i-Aqdas.
This has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much, Roshan, for taking time to speak with us about your book.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate the dialogue.
Dimensions of Bahá'í Law by Dr. Roshan Danesh is available on Bahá'íBookstore.com or wherever you get your distribution services. Subscribe or follow Bahá'í Books and Authors with your chosen podcast platform. This podcast is produced by World Unity Media.